Hello learners, welcome to our today's financial accounting class lesson. We are going to introduce a new topic, which is Introduction to Public Sector Accounting. Public Sector Accounting. Public Sector. Introduction to Public Sector Accounting. Introduction to Public Sector Accounting. Now, in this topic, candidates, we will be covering the following subtopics. Number one is features of public sector entities. We learn about the features of public sector entities. The second subtopic will be the structure of public sector. The structure of the public sector. The third subtopic will be regulatory structures and oversight. Regulatory structures and oversight. Number four is objectives of public sector financial statements. Objectives of public sector financial statements. In this topic, we'll also cover the objectives. We learn about the objectives of International Public Sector Accounting Standards, IPSAS, International Public Sector Accounting Standards. Then we will also have an opportunity to learn the accounting techniques in public sector. In public sector, excluding calculations, excluding the preparation of financial statements, excluding preparation of financial statements, excluding preparation of financial statements. So this is what is required of the candidate. So in our today's lesson, we will, by the end of our today's lesson, learner, you should be able to define public sector entities. You should also be able to give examples of public sector entities and also the features of public sector entities. So we are going to learn three things in our first lesson. Number one, we define public sector entities. Number two, we give examples of public sector entities. Number three, we will discuss the features of public sector entities. So this is public sector entities. Public sector entities. Now, public sector learners, public sector consists of governments and all publicly controlled, or we can say publicly funded agencies, corporations, these are state corporations, and other entities, that deliver, public programs, public goods, and public services. So the public sector consists of the government and all the publicly controlled or publicly funded agencies. Okay, so we have 1, governments, 2, agencies, 3, state corporations, and any other entities that deliver public programs, goods or services. So I'm going to list examples of public sector entities. Examples of public sector entities. Examples of public entities include number one, the first example is the government and any department of government, Number 2 is commissions established under the Constitution. And there are many commissions. Number 3, the third example of an entity that falls into the category of public sector entity is the state corporations. Another example is for the Central Bank of Kenya. Number 5, the public schools that are formed in accordance with the Education Act. Then number 6 is the public universities. Number 7, colleges and any other institution that is funded by the government. So these are examples of public sector entities: the government and any department of government. Number 2, commissions established under the Constitution. Number 3, state corporations, Central Bank of Kenya, the public schools, public universities, colleges, and other institutions that is funded by the government. So let's now move on to discuss the features of public sector entities. Features of public sector entities. The first feature is 1. State ownership. State ownership. This simply means public sector entities are owned by the state. Owned by the state. State ownership. Public sector entities. Public sector entities are owned by the government. Are owned by the government, e.g. the central bank, the CBK, the central bank, owned by the government. The second feature is that these entities are state controlled. The entities are controlled by the government, both in management, controlled both in management and in functionality The third feature, number 3, is service motive. The motive of state corporations is to provide the public programs, public goods, and public services. The service motive, the major objective of such organizations is to provide public programs, public goods, and public services, unlike the private sector entities whose motive is to make profit. The public sector entities' major motive or objective is to provide public goods, public services, and public programs. The fourth feature is state-funded, meaning funded by the government, funded by the state. For an organization to operate effectively, it has to have funds. These funds for public sector entities are provided by the government. It's a very important feature. State-funded. The funds, you can write the funds required to run these entities, is provided by the government. State funded. Then lastly is public accountability. What does that mean? Public accountability. It means that these public sector entities are accountable to the public, to the people. They have to account. They have to give an account to the public or to the people, because these organizations are funded by the people. Because we said the state funds these organizations, but you see the government does not have money of its own. The money that the government uses to fund these organizations is the money that the people give the government in form of taxes and other sources of raising public funds. So public accountability, public accountability. Public entities, you can write, public entities are accountable. Okay, public entities are accountable to the people, at large, to the people at large, as they are funded by public money. They are funded by public money. Now, why do I say at large? It's because, for example, the Kenyan population is approximately 40 million. The 40 million may not be able to sit in a room so that these officers of state corporations or these entities can give an account. This accountability is exercised through legislature, through the cabinet secretaries, and through the state auditors. So the accountability, this accountability is realized, through legislature and its committees, cabinet secretaries, and also the auditors and audit institutions like the office of the Auditor General, So the reason why the public sector entities are accountable to the legislature is, as I mentioned earlier, the legislature is a house of representatives of the people. The people, the 40 million, are represented in parliament. They are represented in parliament by the members of parliament. And in Kenya at the moment we have close to 350 members of parliament, and again the 350 or 349 members of parliament cannot sit in an office for these officers to give an account of the operations of the public sector entities. So they have to select committee, to choose among themselves a few members who form committees to scrutinize the expenditure, the operations of the state corporations. And if you have television, you must have watched where governors or members of parliament appearing before a committee of parliament to give an account of funds or to give an account of the budget or to submit budgets. So that is how public accountability is realized. That is how public accountability is realized. So these are features of public sector entities. Number 1, state ownership. Number 2, state control. Number 3, the service motive is to provide public goods and services. Number 4, state funded. Number 5, public accountability. So these are the features of public sector entities, and you can see they are different from the features of the private sector entities. Private sector entities. The private sector entities are not funded by the state. They are funded by the members of the public. If it is a private company, it will be funded by the shareholders who are members, citizens. The citizens provide funds for the private sector, whether it is a private company or a public company or partnership, any form of business. As for the state control, the private sector entities are not controlled by the state, are not directly controlled by the state. These are controlled, if it's a company, by the directors who are appointed by the owners of the companies. The service motive for private sector entities is largely to make profit, as opposed to the publicly owned institutions whose motive is to provide goods, public services, and public programs. State funded. Private sector entities are not funded by the state, but are funded by, if it's a company, the shareholders who are members of the public. They raise funds in form of shares to the company. Then accountability, the accountability of private sector entity is not to the public, but the accountability is to the shareholders, okay? To the shareholders. Those who run privately controlled entities have to account to the shareholders. So that is how private sector can be distinguished from the public sector entities on the basis of the features or the characteristics. So candidates, we have come to the end of our today's lesson, where we have, number 1, defined public sector entities. Number 2, we have listed examples of public sector entities. Number 3, we have discussed the features of public sector entities. Is there any question? If you have a question, below this video there is a comment section where you can post your questions. And if you do that, I will answer all the questions. Thank you for being attentive. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to get yourself a copy of our professionally prepared study text and revision partners.